In the spring of 1991, I came across an album called Spiderland by the group Slint. There wasn't much information on the front sleeve. Neither the band name or the album title appeared, just a black and white photograph of four guys floating in a quarry. It's a very singular record and felt personal. It kind of seemed like it created its own world and wasn't like other music that I'd heard up to that point.
1980, I think, would have been the year that Britt and I met, and it would have been when I enrolled at the Brown School.
Britt calls me on the phone one day, he's like, listen to this. And he puts the phone down, and Paul is playing with them.
He might have only been playing guitar for 2 years or something, but he would like practice like 9 hours a day in the summertime.
You couldn't really do anything to it. Like, you couldn't bang your head to it, you couldn't slam to it, because the thrash parts would only be for like 30 seconds, and I'd go into an incredibly slow part. Britt and I had these songs that we wanted to work on, and that's when I started talking to Ethan, who was my best friend at the time.
I was the oldest, and I was, I guess, about 18, and I think Britt was still about 16.
He said he wanted to form a band that was completely different from anything else at the time. I told him that Britt was into the same thing, that maybe they should meet.
You know, all of these Slint songs began down there under the floor.
There's a camera up here. Does anybody want this? Is this Rick's or?
No thanks.
Okay, all right.
I guess guitar, like Brian's guitar over there, and Dave's guitar, and the bass.
Did you know that it was raining?
Would be
Did you know that it was raining?
like right here. The drums over there.
Britt's parents were great. Maurice practiced there, Scorbate practiced there. When Slint formed, they practiced there.
They were just always super tolerant and cool about all the weird stuff going on down there.
I think they really wanted to provide like a, sort of like a safe harbor or whatever, and I don't think I ever witnessed any sort of behavior that was motivated in an attempt to like shut us down or say, hey, that's not cool. I think that we were smart enough to kind of know what lines needed to be maintained.
Of course, we had an outside door to the basement, so they would go in and out, and many times I wouldn't know if there were 3 down there or 12.
I remember being over there one day, I guess it was Ron's birthday, and I remember Britt yelling up at his dad like, hey Dad, listen to this. It's the song Ron for Ron's birthday. That was kind of really cool. It's like, sounds good, Britt.
Britt's dad is a piano player. One time we were practicing, and then when we were done practicing, we could hear the piano upstairs, and he was playing the song on the piano.
Originally, we wanted Will to sing and play guitar, and he hadn't been in a band at that point. He came to a practice, and we sort of tried him out, but he only knew like a couple of chords. He was just learning how to play guitar. When we played our first show, he showed up, but he didn't sing or do anything. He just sat in front of the kick drum and held it in place.
This is the program from our first show. Was a band, actually before we were called Slint.
Ethan's dad is a Unitarian, and they were doing electron rock and roll music, so they were like, Ethan's son has a band, a rock and roll band, maybe they should play.
I was very uncomfortable because I thought, oh my goodness, these people, are they going to appreciate this or understand it, or are they going to... I was uncomfortable that night. Do you remember that performance?
It was during a service, wasn't it? Daytime.
The service begins with greetings, announcements, lighting of the chalice, and then music, rock and roll music by small, dirty, tight tufts of hair beads. It was funny too because the sermon or the speaker was on mysticism.
I remember, we started the first song, and there was just old ladies, and like kids crying.
Dave had a full stack, and you know, it was like pretty many people just got up and left, like kind of stoically, just like because they were, you know, it was just really loud.
And you think that Brian might have been at that show and seen it and liked it?
Yeah, Brian came to it, and I think he recorded on micro cassette. Yeah, and he just seemed like he really liked the band. And
I'd say for Tweez, I joined the band after at least half that material was written.
Most of it was Britt. You know, Britt would sort of come up with the foundations for the songs, and then Dave Pajo and Brian would add parts on top of that.
I mean, Britt was just a huge part of the band. He was involved in every aspect of it. You know, he would help me like with my guitar sound or like settings on my pedals or something. Even a song like Rhoda, where the whole end of the song is just harmonics, like that's something I never would have thought of.
What are harmonics?
It's like you hit the string at a certain point, and
it's like when you don't fret the note like you do with a normal chord or whatever. You hit the 12th fret and the 7th and the 5th.
Yeah, just kind of, it's just another way to mess around.
I remember they played the Battle of the Bands at my high school. They took like an hour and a half to set up. I mean, people were just bitching and moaning and complaining, like, who do these kids think they are? They're taking an hour and a half to set up at a Battle of the Bands.
It's a good like template for like our entire career, that video, just because it's you know, we did spend a lot of time tuning in between songs.
Britt was a really big fan of Big Black. We all were. And Steve Albini was a producer, and some other bands that we knew of had been recording with him too. So we wanted to record with Steve Albini.
Steve agreed to do it, and he was working a lot at Studio Media in Evanston, and so that's where we did it.
Steve hadn't met Ethan before. I just remember when we first drove to his house from Louisville as a housewarming gift, Britt and Brian had bought him a shotgun that they got at a pawn shop. And we showed up really, really late because for one reason or another. And so it was like late at night, and we hid in the bushes or hid in the van or something, and had Ethan go to his front door with the shotgun he never met, and like we told him just to ring the doorbell, and when he opened the door, just aim the shotgun at him and bug your eyes out. And he did it. And I remember Steve just slammed the door, and as soon as he saw Ethan, and then there was like 30-second pause, and then he opened the door and was like, "Come in."
For kids, like they were teenagers, they were kids, they were phenomenal musicians. Like Paho was a really accomplished guitar player already, and Britt was a really great drummer in terms of like having an internal clock that allowed him to like sort of roll through a bunch of stuff, like regardless of what was happening around him, he could sort of, you know, keep his shit together. And they were all very conscious of the sound of their instruments. Like that was a really big thing for them. I had a bunch of long conversations with Britt. Like they were really satisfied with the demo cassettes that they were making in their basement. He gave me a few specific things that he wanted to do that would be different from those demo recordings.
Steve, these headphones are fucked up. They're only coming out at one side. Should I just spare with it or what?
For the first song, we had like 2 mics swinging back and forth, and you know, Brian broke a bottle on the floor, and we recorded that. Or he would just like start beating the music stand and like trying to dent it. And, you know, we just did all kinds of stuff.
Or we'd write down words that we thought were funny or that Britt thought were funny. That's why you get those sequences of words, you know, like Snatch Feast and Tweezer Fetish. And he'd make a loop of it and it'd go around in a loop. You know, before they had like digital loops, it was just a real loop.
One of the coolest things about that first Slint record was the way they kind of bridged from song to song with like random noises.
There's a beautiful winding road in Louisville called Rose Island Road that we were very fond of back in high school. We were very fond of riding it, meaning we'd go out there and drive it as fast as we dared. Britt and Brian had this conception for what they wanted the cover to look like.
It was just like, take a picture of the front of a Saab on like Rose Island Road, or like a road where there's trees and stuff.
Joe Oldham took that picture.
Oh, yeah.
We went out on some godforsaken road in the county somewhere, I don't remember where, and blocked the road off. I mean, you know, we weren't allowed, I mean, we had no right to do this, we just blocked access to it.
And then is that Will in the driver's seat?
It is, yes. He's wearing a crash helmet, I believe.
At the time Slint recorded this record, I was working at a photo lab. I had to remove the name Saab off of the grill and remove the license plate, the characters in the license plate. And I can't remember if they superimposed Slint on that at the print shop or if I did that. I think I may have made the negatives to do that as well. I don't remember.
They wanted to put the names of our parents as the titles of the song.
I think all the parents were surprised.
Yeah.
I don't know that any
Carol
of us knew it. I'm not
Kent
sure they had
McMahon,
names.
you know,
Did they
we
have names for those songs before they had to commit them to print?
Just, I thought it would be funny just because I was thinking of that song Charlotte, and then just imagining like, you know, my mom, and like that's her song.
I mean, when I listen to Tweez now, it does sound like it's way more processed than it probably needed to be in terms of there being like extra sound added and stuff.
Ethan just hated it once he got home and started listening to it, and tried in vain to convince them to scrap it and re-record.
But at the time, it was a lot of people wanted to do stuff like that. You know, sort of like, I don't know what you call it, like pig fuck punk rock kind of stuff. All those bands, you know, like Killdozer, Jesus Lizard, and there's a lot of that kind of stuff was really popular.
I actually feel bad about, I know Ethan sort of personally blamed me for not liking the way that first Slint record came out. And I can't argue with him. I mean, it's quite likely that I was, cockier than I needed to be or than was warranted. And it's quite likely that I was more like sort of encouraging this like extraneous material.
Keep in mind I was only 19, so I was like, I'd get a lot more passionate about stuff than I do now back then. But I didn't like the way the recording sounded, and I didn't like what Steve Albini did to it. And I thought it kind of got screwed up a little bit, so I decided I was going to quit.
There just wasn't anything like it. I mean, I guess it's cliche, but it's just true. Like, nobody sounded like that.
Past where the river bends, past where the silo stands, past where they paint the houses. Past where the river bends, past where the silo stands, past where they paint the houses.
I think literally my neighbor, like, we were like cutting grass or something, and he came over and said, "You need to listen to this. This band is from here." And I really couldn't believe that there would be people who weren't much older than me that were able to do music like that.
Todd Brashear had been in this hardcore band I was in called Solution Unknown. He was playing guitar with them, and he was just a huge Slint fan. He recorded it on 4-track, our show when we opened for Big Black.
When Ethan quit, I guess I kind of let it be known that I would be interested in taking his place if they wanted to let me try or whatever.
It was, 3 years between when Tweez was recorded and Spiderland was recorded. So a lot happened in those 3 years.
After Tweez, Britt and Brian were going to Northwestern.
Particularly with Britt, we almost immediately made this connection. I was really impressed with his imagination and the weird turns that his brain takes and the way he thinks about things. Britt and I and Corey built Corey's office in the old Touch and Go building. And one day we were working on framing up the office, and Britt and I had gone to 7-Eleven, and he had a big gulp or a Coke or something. And a little while later, it had melted and it was just kind of watery. And so I was done with the cigarette and I threw it in there, and he went to take a drink, and he went, "Oh man, why would you do that?" And I said, "Sorry, I thought you were done." So we kept working and doing stuff, and later I had a Coke and I went to take a drink of it, and he had dumped it out and taken a shit into it and put the straw back, and I laughed really hard.
Any truth to the idea that the Jesus Lizard song Mouth Breather was in any way a reference to Brit?
Completely.
I don't really remember where I was, but I was gone for an extended period, and Britt was house sitting for me. I lived in a bungalow on the north side, and I don't know if Britt had ever lived alone in a house before. I don't know if he knew sort of how a house worked, but fairly early in the occupation, he locked himself out. So he kicked the front door in, and then nailed the front door shut with a 2x4. And he would do all of his coming and going through a window in the attic. Like, he would go up to the attic and climb out the window and then hop down on the porch and then out. And then he would get back in through and that was the same way the cat got in and out of the house.
And something else went wrong with the kitchen or the bathroom. Something overflowed and was leaking, and Steve had his studio down in the basement, and it rained pea water down in the basement.
And I actually think I was relaying this story to David Yao at one point, and I was complaining about the state of my house and what had happened on that trip. And I said, and I literally said, don't get me wrong, he's a nice guy. I like him just fine, but he's a mouth breather.
There was this bar called Leader's Liquors that was 2 or 3 blocks from where Steve lived. I think a lot of my memories of Britt are like sitting at the bar in Leaders. And the first time I ever really sort of got to know him better was like talking to him all night at Leaders one night. And I remember coming away just going like, what an interesting, odd kid he is. He was just uniquely different than anyone else I was hanging out with at the time. And it was especially interesting because he was several years younger than everyone else. It was that sort of indescribable Louisville quality that Slint are the core of, I think.
I think the rumor at the time was that he could hypnotize girls by staring at them.
Basically, Brian had his guitar amp and his guitar there, and so I would just play that. And he had a classical, too, that maybe he played on, but we never really played together.
I know they had a guitar that was always plugged into an amp in like their living room, and that became like, you know, like it's for me, when I would go visit them, it seemed like that was like where they would just like, anyone could just pick it up and sit down and like come up with ideas, and Britt had a little tape recorder to save them. And that's where like songs like Nosferatu Man got written.
One night, I had been out and came back at like I don't know, like 2 in the morning, and Britt was hunched over his guitar and playing Rachmaninoff little piece over and over. It was like, you know, a 3 or 4 second little clip, and he'd play it, rewind it, play it, rewind it, and then he'd work on the guitar for a little bit, and I think he did that for hours. You know, I went to bed, and he, I think, continued to do that for hours and hours.
Slint play. When you're someone's brother, it just kind of like, I was like, yeah, that's cool, but like, I'm not gonna go see him or anything. I was into my own stuff, like just video camera. I'd take video camera to the Slint practice.
Throw it.
After that year of college, we all came back to town and then just worked on those songs.
Practiced 5 days a week at Britt's house in the basement.
We would just start off with something and then add things and, you know, build a song kind of like, you know, one part at a time.
The way the writing process is if one person had a riff, they would play that riff till the end of time, basically, while somebody else was trying to write other parts.
Yeah, it made for some really interesting and sort of hypnotic rehearsals.
on for hours, which is kind of crazy. I mean, we were all kind of out of our minds or something, you know what I mean? Like just that we definitely had a certain mindset to be able to sit there and do that for that long.
It was really cool, like, because after we got into it, practicing, like the more we did it, the more I enjoyed it.
Yeah, just like, and then I kind of think it sounds good. You know what I mean? Yeah.
They played at a place called the Kentucky Theater, and once again, it was sort of deliberately not a spectacle. There were a couple floor lamps, you know, no big production or anything.
They played all instrumental versions of many of the songs that came out a month or two later on Spiderland, and it was the first time that I had heard what they'd been up to over the course of the last year. And I imagine the first time almost everyone in attendance had heard it. And we were all stunned by what we heard.
You just watched it year after year. They would get more. There was something, they were planning something. You could see it in Britt's head. He was just like, had this idea, and it kept coming out, and he'd sit and play guitar and come up with these riffs, and you were like, what the fuck is that?
There's sort of more of a traditional songwriting element that was starting to be incorporated in our stuff, and not in the sense that we were going to start doing folk music, but it was like the songs became stories.
I started thinking about lyrics like early and when the songs were developing. Although everybody else didn't necessarily hear the ideas until later on, we were like pretty loud, so it didn't really lend itself to doing these like spoken vocals in this tiny room with like Britt's huge drums and Dave's like full stack. We would record our rehearsals in the basement, and I would do 4-track vocals on top of them, largely in my parents' car in the garage.
When he woke, there was no trace of the ship. Only the dawn was left behind by the storm. The young man felt the creaking of the stairs beneath him that rose from the sea to the door.
So I would like basically be in a hot parked car inside of a garage in Louisville with headphones on, like in a closed car with the windows up, going like listening over to these songs and trying to figure out how I was gonna do the phrasing and stuff.
I stepped out onto the midway. I was
the Breadcrumb Trail, just musically, with how that song is structured, it seemed to suggest itself as sort of this, like maybe sort of like loss of innocence sort of thing. It was one of the last songs for me to, I think, complete lyrics before going into the studio. So I think I was more aware of the album sequence at that point.
I pulled back the drape thing on the tent. There was a crystal ball on the table. Behind it, a girl wearing a hat.
More or less, the songs were recorded live, all the basic tracks. There was, you know, amps and different rooms and stuff, just for isolation of the audio, but yeah, all the basic performances were live.
Like the size of the room was really big, the live room, and it was really kind of top-notch, like studio. And so it was just awesome. It sounded just really fucking great.
But there's a spoken word part right before the big ending, the I Miss You part, that he was just sort of improvising at the time, and he was trying to build up to that part, and he was trying out different things in the studio.
I'm trying to find my way home. I'm sorry. I miss you.
Like he had a light just like right above him, but it was dark all around him.
When he did the I'm sorry part, he wasn't sure if he wanted to keep it or not and wanted to go back and redo it. But I think all of us in the studio were just like, you know, we're in the control room and just like, you have to keep that.
Yeah, man, he was like dripping wet, yes.
Sorry, I couldn't hear, what was that?
Dripping wet.
Like how? I don't understand what you mean.
Well, he was like sweating and just really, you know, like, I don't know. He might have like gotten sick or something, like puked or something like.
Soon after the recording of Spiderland, Brian checked himself into a hospital. The band Slint would never enter a recording studio again.
Like my favorite records always get better as they go on. They don't start off strong and then get weaker. They always sort of introduce you to their world and then get better by the end of the record. And that, I think that was the basic premise for the sequencing.
Brian pretty much is the foresight of the band. I mean, as far as like deciding that Glenn and Pam that we recorded at the same session, like, would be better if they weren't on there. Like, that was his idea, and it was like, yeah, definitely. We had the idea of going to the quarry to take photos, and we took some other photos too in different locations, which just didn't really look like anything. Brian pretty much like had the good eye on that. I don't know, Brian had a lot of the ideas for the name of the album was his idea.
Slint, Spiderland, recorded August through October 90. engineered by Brian Paulson Band, photo by Will Oldham, spider photo by Noel Saltzman, interested female vocalist, right, 1864 Douglas Boulevard, Louisville, Kentucky, 40205.
Were you surprised that the address of the house was going to be put on the record, and did that cause any?
I didn't even know about it, but no, not really. It didn't really cause any problems.
Dear Slint, I'm a girl of 5, and my daddy says I will become a singer. Too good for Slint. I'm not interested. Thank you. That's awesome. Dr. Ill.
That record became the soundtrack to my life at that moment. It was so different from, most of the rest of what we were putting out in a way that I just loved.
I got into Slint kind of at the very end, and then it just totally hit me, and I was super into it, and I just never really even said much of anything. I might have called Brian one time and just said man, this is really awesome. I don't think you understand. This is really great, and he would just be like, yeah, that's cool.
Touch and Go released Spiderland in March of 1991 in a small press run of several thousand copies. Because Slint had actually broken up before its release, there were no tours, no interviews, no music videos, and not much initial response from college radio.
At the time, the chances of that being big on college radio weren't that great. I mean, we tried, but if you look at what was going on, it wasn't like college radio was just waiting for this record.
One of the only pieces of promotion that did exist was a positive record review written by Steve Albini that was published in a UK music magazine called The Melody Maker. Despite the band not being around to promote Spiderland, the album began to find an audience, selling more and more copies each year, almost entirely by word of mouth. Almost immediately after breaking up as Slint, all 4 members would work with Will Oldham on the early Palace Brothers recordings. The band actually briefly reformed in both 1992 and 1994, secretly working on some new material in a remote cabin in the woods before dissolving again.
We had an idea that we really wanted to just go somewhere and just be the 4 of us.
It wasn't regular rehearsal. We just went through a couple of spurts, and we just worked on just really only a couple different ideas.
What was it like? Was it kind of in any way similar to the previous stuff or completely different?
It was a little different. Seemed like it was a little looser.
It was fun, and it was really kind of this weird period of, I don't want to say it would definitely be wrong to say euphoric, but it was this sense oh my God, could we do this and make money, and what would that mean, and how do we feel about that, and what sort of music do we make now, and there was a lot of stuff I think on our minds in that regard, and ultimately, I just think just timing wasn't right.
I got an apartment on B or C in 3rd Street, and he kind of took over my room. He was staying in my place and feeding my cat.
Do you remember his baking job?
Fuck! He baked sexy cakes, didn't he? What was the place called? It was called,
Master Bakers.
Master Bakers! Shit! He baked penis cakes and tit cakes.
I was like, what the fuck are you doing? I was like, well, man, I just thought it would be cool to come up to New York, and just learn how to bake, I was like, dude, I was like, you playing at all? No.
He made penis cakes and did not play as Slint or as Evergreen or in the Breeders. He didn't do any of that. He made penis cakes and lived in my apartment with my cat. This guy who made decisions, I don't know what that matrix is like in there that makes those decisions. There was no passivity. He's not a passive guy. He was like, I really want to try dishwashing. I really want to bake erotic cakes.
In the years following the release of Spiderland, you could occasionally find new releases popping up in record stores, where if you dug through the liner notes, you might realize that one of these guys had been involved. Sometimes unattributed, and sometimes under fake names. Brian formed a band called the Four Carnation and recorded several releases. David Pajo performs under his own name, as well as the names M, Papa M, and Ariel M. He's also been a member of Tortoise, Royal Trucks, Stereolab, Dead Child, and the Four Carnation, and still tours regularly with other bands, including Interpol and the Yeah Yeah Yeahs. Todd Brashear went on to perform and record with Palace Brothers, Bonnie Prince Billy, and Rising Shotgun. He also opened a video store called Wild and Woolly in 1997. After leaving Slint, Ethan Buckler formed King Kong, and was joined by the other members of Slint on early recordings. Britt might have the most complicated body of work outside of Slint.
Like that band, The Breeders, that Britt has like everything to do with that, the way that that first album sounds and feels and stuff. And somehow, like I was like, oh wait, the Slint guy's in The Breeders? What? You know? And what? No, now he's not? Like, what the fuck is up with this guy? You know, like what is his deal?
Prior to Spiderland, Britt had played drums and provided vocals for the Breeders' debut album Pod and the Safari EP, but it was under a series of fake names.
When Kim was in Chicago doing a one-song session with the Pixies, that's when Britt met Kim. And I think they hit it off. I think they recognized that each was a little bit insane. Britt was really totally solid on that whole thing. I think he kind of backed into an appreciation for that music and that band. Moving Britt from Slint, which is fairly abstract music, into the Breeders, which is fairly linear, fairly straightforward music, gives you an idea of what differentiates Britt from a conventional drummer. Like that he could adapt his kind of odd but sort of continuous drumming style into a band that was basically writing 3-chord pop songs. I think was kind of remarkable.
But again, the crucial thing was that he wasn't like a guy who was ever trying to get attention. It was like people were always chasing him.
At the time that the rock world was catching up with Spiderland, Britt was nowhere to be found on the indie rock circuit. Instead, he had devoted himself to playing with aging blues musicians. Britt hasn't had a recording project in several years, but still keeps cassettes full of piano lines and guitar riffs and ideas for songs.
Most of the stuff that I come up with, I mean, none of it have I done anything with. Like, it's kind of just been waiting for a band. Like, I've just kind of not found another, idea for a way to, create something from it.
I mean, I feel really fortunate just to have been able to have been a part of the band and just to do it. I don't really have much access to the sort of mystique or whatever.
Yeah, for all the mystique that surrounds the band and how seriously everybody takes it and stuff, really, we all had a pretty good time, I would say, most of the time. I think people would be surprised how much time we spent goofing off and laughing and being idiots or whatever.
Yeah, it was cool just how, you know, just how, like, I guess comfortable with each other we were. I don't know, that was the best part of Slint, I thought, was the collaborating, because we could all get along so well and, you know, musically just understood each other, I thought. And yeah, that's my favorite thing about, you know, playing music. You know, just like saying anything just that came out of our mouths, you know.